So just yesterday morning, Nintendo decided to drop a very interesting announcement in the form of a Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Nintendo Switch Special Edition OLED console, and this is right after the announcement of a Special Edition Splatoon 3 OLED. And in today's video, I want to break down and discuss whether or not this Special Edition OLED treatment means anything in terms of a Breath of the Wild 2 console around the corner, or even brand new, more powerful hardware to come in 2023. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, today we are discussing all things Nintendo Switch OLED and special editions of this console, as special editions are not something that Nintendo shies away from by any stretch of the imagination. We have seen them do this numerous times, not only throughout the Switch's life cycle with special edition consoles, starting off with things like Animal Crossing, Smash Bros, and even a Mario themed red and blue edition Switch. It is also notable to see major releases back to back for the OLED, such as Splatoon 3 most recently getting an official announcement for new hardware that would be available ahead of the game's release, and this new Pokemon announcement will as well. And it's a very interesting pattern to watch Nintendo tackle, because this again reminds me how Nintendo could be viewing this current console generation more as a mobile style console than a traditional home console, as with traditional Nintendo home consoles outside of systems like the N64 that got all of the various color treatments, which is very different than what you have with special game themed Switches. What we typically have seen Nintendo do up to this point in history is focus on special edition handheld devices, primarily in the DS, 3DS era of gaming, and it definitely raises the question, how is Nintendo viewing the Switch? Are they viewing it more like a traditional home console, or more like a handheld device that they are known for doing numerous revisions throughout its life cycle, with the DS and 3DS systems essentially getting late life refreshes that are actually more powerful, with things like the new 3DS that could actually run games at better frame rates, and even run some games from the new 3DS library that are exclusive to the new version of that console. So it does make me slow down and think a little bit when you see back-to-back announcements like this. As you can see, the following from VGC, with the headline reading Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Switch OLED model revealed, alongside new game trailer. The special edition console will launch on November 4th with a suggested retail price of $360. Now, first off, we have to quickly discuss the look of this thing, because it absolutely is a beautiful edition of an OLED console, and I couldn't quite justify pulling the trigger on a Splatoon 3 focused console. I'm going to have a very hard time passing this one up, so Nintendo may have gotten some extra money out of me. You notice also that it is a slightly higher price tag at $10 more than just a traditional OLED console. And while I'm not the biggest fan of the Joy-Con colors, I just think the purple and red don't pop as much as they should. I am a gigantic fan of the dock being white, with our two legendaries contrasting strongly, and I just think this thing looks beautiful. The entire back is filled with Pokemon and awesome, not to mention the fantastic trailer that launched the same day as this. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are looking better than ever, and they are also entertaining some new gameplay ideas that I think Nintendo is in a really good spot for Pokemon going forward, and definitely focusing on that open world, open exploration aspect that I cannot wait to pick these games up day one. Now, what I'm calling into question with Nintendo's strategy is, will we see this pattern continue? As we know, Splatoon 3, a major release for Nintendo. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, a major release for Nintendo. Do we see them start to initiate some kind of cycle with games like Breath of the Wild 2 that you know will be a huge, if not one of the biggest of all time games for Nintendo? When Breath of the Wild 2 finally launches, whenever that may be, even though we know to expect spring 2023 right now, we don't know if that's early spring like end of March, or we don't know if it's late spring getting closer to the summer months. And while history would tell you they want to launch it in March because that is the end of the fiscal year, they want to end those numbers strong, they could also need additional development time, or have plans to launch it alongside of either a special edition OLED themed console, which would be one route to go, or the big talking point from a lot of people online is, was this delay actually not just needed for maybe additional development time for the game, but rather Nintendo strategically launching a new, more powerful console alongside of Breath of the Wild 2, not necessarily the next gen hard break and a launch of a Nintendo Switch 2, but rather what a new 3DS would be, or a new Nintendo Switch, or maybe they call it the Super Nintendo Switch if they're awesome, or something like a Nintendo Switch Pro. Essentially the same generation of games being playable. It's fully backwards compatible with your existing library of Switch games, and the new Switch games that continue to come out run on both consoles, but there is one way that you can experience the games with higher frame rates and better resolutions, utilizing technologies like DLSS from Nvidia to allow things like docked 4K performance. And is this a mid-cycle refresh of newer hardware that we know the Nintendo Switch OLED dock is supported for things like 4K 60 out, and whether or not that's just a component thing that it was cheaper to source that part, or if it's something that they strategically allowed in there with a baked in update dock feature, like that is a debatable point that you could go back and forth on online, and clearly we'll never know what Nintendo's planning for sure. But I do think that this trend now of Splatoon 3 and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet getting special edition Switches begs the question that it's got to at least be one or the other for Breath of the Wild 2. Is it new hardware? That is what I am hoping. Do they launch new hardware in addition to supporting a special edition Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild edition of it? I kind of feel like it's got to be one or the other, but maybe fans out there will be extremely lucky and we get both. We actually get the new, more powerful Switch, and we get it customized with a Breath of the Wild style dock and Joy-Cons. That would absolutely be incredible in my book. But if it is indeed more powerful hardware, I can also see Nintendo just launching that in the base colors with maybe different colored Joy-Cons, different colored docks, as we traditionally see them do with actual console refreshes. And I tend to think that a special edition Breath of the Wild 2 Switch is less likely if it is indeed tied to a brand new, more powerful Switch, but I do think it is very likely to happen, similar to the treatment we've seen Splatoon 3 and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet get, to just get at least at the bare minimum, if Nintendo isn't planning new hardware along the launch of Breath of the Wild 2, we are at least, in my book, I think personally, just a prediction, getting some kind of special edition Breath of the Wild Switch OLED. And if that is all we get, I'll be a little bit disappointed, to be honest. I want a special edition Breath of the Wild console, but I want it to be more powerful in a perfect world where everything just goes my way. But clearly we won't know what Nintendo's planning, and you do have to keep in mind that component shortages are still a very real thing, and there is a lot of logistical problems and hoops you have to jump through to launch something like new hardware that doesn't have the same base chipsets you've been using. Although I would argue maybe if they've been sourcing the Tegra X1 for this long, if they do a different, more powerful version of the processor, that's now two different SKUs that you have to source parts for and build, and clearly you're going to get a lot of your existing Switch user base to upgrade to something like a more powerful console, especially when it launches with a blockbuster title like Breath of the Wild 2. I personally think it's the perfect time to do it, with challenges involved and all. And yes, will people have to fight bots and scalpers online? Unfortunately, that is the modern era of purchasing mainline, top line electronics that are popular, and so we will probably have to jump through those hoops if that is the case. I personally hope it is. However, I want to hear from you guys on all your thoughts and speculation around this. Do you think that indeed Nintendo is at the very bare minimum planning something like a Nintendo Switch OLED special edition themed Breath of the Wild 2 Switch, or do you think that this is actually strategically done? The delay may have needed to happen for the game anyway, but they purposely are holding it back to launch in spring of next year, 2023, to send a message to consumers that to play Breath of the Wild 2 in the best possible frame rate, the best possible resolution, when docked or even when in handheld, maybe it has better battery life, this is the time to upgrade your existing Switch to play this marquee Zelda game in the best possible quality. Do you think that that is actually the route that Nintendo is going here and that they are planning? And bonus question, share with me if you think we're getting any type of Breath of the Wild 2 acknowledgement, or maybe even a title reveal at the upcoming, very heavily rumored upcoming September Nintendo Direct that I'm hoping we get official confirmation for soon, most likely next week at this point, of course. But regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, where we look at the list of the top rated Metacritic user reviewed scored GameCube games, and I share my opinions on what I believe Nintendo is really planning in terms of the GameCube library games in the immediate and long-term future for the Nintendo Switch. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.